In the heat of the desert, where the sun blazes relentlessly and the air shimmers with heat, lies a track like no other. Degradation is high, and so are the hopes of 20 Formula 1 drivers itching to push the limits of their new machinery. Here, in the heart of pre-season testing, every second counts. Every lap is a chance to uncover the secrets of speed, to unlock the full potential of man and machine. Amidst the chaos, there's a sense of purpose, a real opportunity to start the new season on the right trajectory. This is Bahrain.
Formula 1 is finally back as pre-season testing kicked off today in Bahrain. It was a relatively smooth day as teams got working through their run plans to prepare for what will be the longest season in F1 history. We saw plenty of Aero Rakes, some interesting developments, and above all, our first look at the 2024 cars on track. We'll analyse all of the action from day one in just a moment. Welcome to the testing show.
Here's your guide to pre-season testing. This year's test will take place from February 21st until February 23rd at the Bahrain International Circuit, the same place where just a week later the Bahrain Grand Prix will happen. Each day's testing will run from 10 AM local time until 7 PM local time and is split into two 4-hour sessions, one in the morning from 10 until 2 and one in the afternoon from 3 until 7, allowing everyone a 1-hour break in the middle. Each team is only allowed one car for the duration of testing, so the drivers will share it, meaning they'll do 1.5 days of the running each. But why is testing important? Over the winter, the teams have been building their cars for the 2024 season, but haven't been able to test any part of them on track, and they need time to check they are reliable, put in some crucial practice laps, and make sure all systems are operational before there are points on the line at the first race. Pre-season testing allows teams to do whatever they like with their new cars, technically speaking. They can run aero rakes, put fuel in and out, change parts, and try the tyre compounds. And it helps the drivers put in some track time in their new challenges. For the engineers, they'll be gathering data throughout the 3 days and checking that it correlates with the data they have from CFD simulations and the wind tunnel to make sure everything is running as expected. So how closely should we be watching the timesheets? Testing times are rarely representative of how teams will perform at the first race, and even less for how they'll do through the season. Beyond this, teams won't reveal how much fuel they have in the car, meaning we could see them sandbagging or doing some glory runs.
So how did you enjoy the first day of testing? Who do you think ran well?
I think the day went very smoothly for everyone. I mean, obviously Red Bull were right out front again with Max Verstappen spending the whole day in the car, and he ended the day 1.1 seconds faster than anyone else on the timing sheets, which I think is an absolutely ominous look for how Red Bull are potentially going to perform in 2024. I know it's only the first day of testing and we can't read into lap times particularly because of fuel and tyres and things like that, and the conditions were not massively representative today. But I think that is an ominous showing for the rest of the grid. And if I was another team right now, I'd be panicking slightly. Who do you think went well?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think Red Bull went pretty well. The V-Carbs went pretty well as well. I think they managed to get quite a lot of laps in. And I think the essential part of testing is just getting as many laps as possible in. So I'm sure they'll be very happy tonight now to know that they've got those down, they've got the data collected, and they can start working off that and correlating it with what they've got on their computers. Apart from that, I think Williams kind of struggled slightly. They had a little bit of an issue on track, as well as McLaren had a few issues off track, I believe. So it's just about them recovering now, ready for tomorrow, and managing to get some more data than they did today. But yeah, I think probably Red Bull were at the top for me. Again, I think it's an ominous look for everybody when Max Verstappen is already 1.1 seconds ahead. I know, don't read too much into testing times, but I don't know. It's not looking great for everybody else at the moment.
So you mentioned that Williams had a bit of a rough day. Can you explain a little bit about what went on there?
Yeah, sure. So Alex Albon stopped on track. I think it was just at the end of the morning session. I think there was about 20 minutes or so left of the session. And we thought he was going to bring out a red flag. He didn't in the end. And what we heard from Williams was that was a fuel pump issue. So he was able to get pushed back to the marshal post and obviously then return back to the garage. And then this afternoon, obviously, Logan Sargent had a little bit of a spin. Nothing too much to worry about, I don't think. I think it was kind of like a Danny Rick Monaco 2022 situation where the floor just sort of caught a bump. He lost all the downforce and then he was just a sitting duck as the car span around.
I don't think it was all bad news for Williams. Yes, they had those couple of setbacks, but I do think they've had a bit more of a puzzling day than they were expecting. Logan Sargent said that the car felt very different to last year, and we know last year that they were very fast down the straights and a little bit worse in the corners. And Alex Albon today backed that up, saying that they're now slower down the straights but better in the corners. So they're balancing a little bit of a trade-off there with the straights and the corners, and I think that as a team they're perhaps struggling to manage that today because it's so different to what they were working with last year. I think they'll just have to plug in the data tonight and set the groundwork for tomorrow, but I think they've had a solid day despite those setbacks.
So Aston Martin is saying that all of their numbers are already correlating to their CFD and their wind tunnel, so that's obviously excellent news for them, and a huge contrast to what happened last year when, I think it was the morning session, Felipe Drugovich was taking over the car because Lance Stroll had broken his wrists, and he red flagged the session and was out for, I think, most of it. So it's obviously a good starting point for them to be ahead of where they were last year, and we know how strong they were last year anyway, so starting off on a better foot is not going to be bad for them.
Yeah, I think McLaren are in a similar situation, to be honest. I mean, last year they had massive issues with the brake duct and the cake tin, and they were working on that and taping that up for the majority of testing, and so didn't get many laps in. They were in the garage for a lot of the time. Today, Lando and Oscar all together have put in over 130 laps, so it's looking incredibly reliable for McLaren at this point, and hopefully the car is a good step forward from last year, and already it looks like technically and reliability-wise that is the case. Last year's champions Red Bull Racing have caught a lot of attention on track and in the pit lane today for their innovative solutions to take their car to the next level. But what changes have they made?
We've been able to get a look at the testing specifications of the 2024 cars today, one of which being Red Bull Racing's RB20. From their launch, we knew that the team weren't going down the conventional road for their car, and instead were being bold and brave with their new design. As bold as it might be, the team also claim it's an evolution of their championship-winning RB19, but it's clear that there are some key areas of innovation and change. One of these that's most unique is their inlets. Their initial renderings indicated that the car had no inlets at all, but now we've seen the car on track, it's clear that this is not the case. A closer look at a photo from their launch spec car revealed that they seem to have gone with vertical sidepod inlets, akin to those of the Mercedes W14 at the start of 2023, and a look at a 3D render of the car showed horizontal inlets under a significant overbite. So which have they actually gone with? Well, the answer is both. Thanks to this close-up photo taken in the pit lane today, we can see that the RB20 has a thin vertical inlet, but also a fairly thin horizontal inlet in the traditional place, but with a thick overbite upper edge. Something new for this year. But if these are so thin, then how will Red Bull keep everything cool, especially at the hotter races? The clue to this lies in another area of the car, the links with the huge hulking shoulders that we see on the RB20. Above the driver's head and on either side, near where the halo joins with the shoulders, there are two inlets that seem to directly feed air into the shoulders and then down the side of the car to the rear. This isn't something we've seen before under these regulations. There are also some radiator inlets on the flatter side of these shoulders between them and the upper surface of the side pod, which could be opened and closed as necessary. So how have the team been able to innovate in these areas, especially given that they had an aerodynamic testing restriction last season? Developing new ducting, radiators or heat exchangers underneath the external bodywork for cooling the power unit isn't included in the team's allocated wind tunnel time. Teams aren't allowed to measure downforce during these sessions, but they can still learn a huge amount, and this is something we've seen Red Bull do before to introduce sidepod upgrades last season. Though they're not allowed to measure downforce in these sessions could have allowed Red Bull to compact their cooling and make it more efficient, allowing for tighter inlets, and potentially giving them the freedom to tighten these areas of bodywork and move to a zero pods concept in the future. But for now, there's no doubt that Adrian Newey and the Red Bull team have been innovating over the winter.
So off the back of that, what did you make of Red Bull's day?
Red Bull had a very smooth day. Obviously, Max completed the most laps with 142 laps and set the fastest time with a 1:31.344. I think it's looking pretty tough for their competitors already. I mean, I don't want to say anything too early because it's pre-season testing, but Red Bull are looking pretty strong.
Yeah, they're definitely leading the pack at the moment, but they did have a couple of issues this morning. The car looked a little bit squirrely in those corners. Max was struggling to get it stopped before a corner and running wide quite a lot. I think Max was having those issues on the hardest tyre, on the C1 compound this morning. So I think once they changed that C3 compound this afternoon, it seemed to kind of unlock something in the car. And obviously they've made some technical changes through the day as well and setup, I would imagine. But the car looked on rails this afternoon. And their best performance came on the C3 compound, which will be the softest that we use in Bahrain next week because of the high degradation. So it's looking good for them for qualifying already under those representative conditions towards the end of today. But again, we'll have to wait and see. So as was highlighted in that analysis video, obviously they're looking to take their car in a new direction with their cooling and their side pods. But it also looks like a very flexible setup. It looks like one where they could close off one or the vertical or the horizontal inlet or some of the side ones, depending on the conditions of where we're racing. And then potentially, because of these tighter inlets, they could remove them and go for the zero pod concept, which would be interesting to see.
We saw many teams running Aero Rakes on their cars as they look to get to grips with how the cars are running on track versus their simulations and the wind tunnel. But what are Aero Rakes?
Pre-season testing is one of the most technically interesting parts of the season, as teams play around with their cars to find their optimal performance. One way they do this is through using aerodynamic rakes, or Aero Rakes for short. But what are these? Aero Rakes are a big collection or array of sensors that measure air pressure and velocity at a point around the car. The sensors are attached to a frame to create a grid-like pattern so that when the car is driven and air flows around it, the sensors can create a map of the airflow around that section of the car. There are two possible sensors that teams can use on these frames to collect their data: pitot tubes or keel probes. Pitot tubes measure the air velocity from a difference in pressure, but they can be sensitive to yaw or direction, meaning that if the flow of air is not straight on, the reading can be inaccurate. To overcome this, many teams now use keel probes, which are very similar but have a cover over the inlet to help straighten the flow. Aero rakes come in many weird and wonderful shapes and sizes, so it's not always obvious when a team is using one. But usually teams will run one just behind the front axle or near the rear axle to measure how the airflow is moving around key areas of the car like the front wing, side pods and diffuser. But why bother with this when simulations exist? Though the teams will have run numerous CFD simulations of their car, none of this compares to getting out on track and measuring the real thing. Gathering data from the track with methods like an aero rake allows the engineers to then correlate the real-world data with that from simulations and the wind tunnel to make sure everything lines up. If not, it's clear something's gone wrong, and the team can work to fix this issue, making them a powerful tool for getting the best out of your car. Another big theme of discussion for the day was Mercedes' front wing, which, although has been found legal by the FIA, is one of the more interesting solutions we've seen for a front wing since the regulations came in. Let's have a look at what they've changed and perhaps how it relates back to an old part of the regulations. Since Mercedes launched their W15 and ran it on track for the first time with their innovative and unique front wing, the front wings of the cars have become a strong talking point. So let's take a look at Mercedes' solution and how it stands up against the regulations. Firstly, to understand where Mercedes have innovated, we need to know what a conventional front wing for this year looks like. A front wing in Formula 1 has four elements, the parts that bridge from the nose to the end plate. The first one is often called the leading element, then we have the second, third, and fourth. Under previous regulations, the elements wouldn't attach directly to the nose to create a gap between the nose and the wing and make use of what's called the Y250 vortex. This was where the 250mm gap between the nose and the inside of the wing elements created some air vortices and accelerated the airflow towards the barge boards we had under those regulations, and then out away from the car. But it's this effect that caused a huge amount of dirty air and made it very difficult for the cars to follow each other. So, under the 2022 regulations, this was removed, along with the barge boards to keep the air within the width of the car. The regulations around the present front wings ensure there is less downforce produced by the wing alone and therefore less dirty air. But what Mercedes have done with their front wing could go against the spirit of this regulation. Mercedes have a unique fourth element to their wing, as where it connects to the nose is now incredibly thin. Though there was talk of it being a legality wire, pictures from testing show it as being a very small piece of carbon. The team have satisfied the FIA's regulation that all four elements are closed. We can see just how different this part of the front wing is when we compare it to a team like Steak's. Steak's front wing is much more conventional within the regulations. All of their elements attach to the nose and the end plate and are closed in FIA terms. The other difference is that Steak's nose picks up the leading edge of the front wing, whereas Mercedes, like Ferrari's, picks up the second element and has a flatter area to the leading edge. While Mercedes' new front wing could be being used to generate a Y250 vortex, the FIA has found it to be within the regulations at this time. So will other teams copy it? It's not really that simple. The front wing, as with any part in an F1 car, works in harmony with the rest of the car, meaning that copying the wing alone is unlikely to do much for another team. This innovation is likely to be unique to Mercedes, at least for now.
So to sum up day one in Bahrain, how do you think it's gone for the teams?
I think it's gone incredibly well and very, very smoothly. I think it shows, we've had these regulations now for a few years. That consistency has helped the teams build up this bulletproof reliability that we're seeing. No one stopped on track with an issue other than a fuel pump problem for Alex Albon, which isn't a major issue, and they fixed it straight away. So I think that reliability allowed the teams to put in some good laps, and they were also faster than we saw last year, I believe. So we're moving in the right direction. Teams are getting faster, but they're also going faster together. So that's a good sign, hopefully, for the racing that we'll get through this year.
Well, we've already been given plenty to look at from just one day of testing, and we hope you've enjoyed this insight. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow with analysis of day 2's action from Bahrain. But for now, make sure to subscribe to be notified when the testing show goes live. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you tomorrow.